In the year 2457, humanity has established several colonies across nearby star systems, a testament to their relentless drive for exploration and expansion. The interstellar exploration vessel Horizon Prime drifted through the Kepler 452 system, its advanced sensors probing the rocky planets that circled a distant, aging star. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in her command chair, her fingers tracing the holographic display that mapped the system's planetary bodies. Preliminary scans are showing something unusual. Lieutenant Camille Noack called out from the sensor station. His voice carried a mix of excitement and caution that immediately caught the captain's attention. "I'm detecting massive geometric structures beneath the surface of the third planet. Definitely not natural formations." The planet in question was a dusty, ochre-colored world that initially appeared lifeless. Spectral analysis suggested a thin atmosphere and minimal geological activity, making it seem like just another unremarkable stop on their survey mission. But the lieutenant's readings told a different story. Rodriguez leaned forward, her augmented reality display highlighting the anomalous structures. Geometric patterns emerged from the planet's rocky crust, perfect lines and symmetrical shapes that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic terrain. "Zoom in and enhance," she commanded, her voice cutting through the low hum of the ship's environmental systems. The holographic display expanded, revealing intricate networks of underground chambers and corridors. They were too precise, too intentional to be anything but artificial. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy, the mission's lead xenorchaeologist, stepped closer to the display, her breath catching in her throat. "Those aren't just structures," she whispered. "They're remnants of a technological civilization far more advanced than anything we've encountered." Her fingers danced across a secondary interface, pulling up comparative data from previous xenorchaeological discoveries. The material composition doesn't match any known technological signature. These are not just buildings. They're components of a massive integrated system. Rodriguez studied the images carefully. Her decades of space exploration had taught her to be both skeptical and open-minded. Humanity had discovered numerous alien artifacts in the past century, but nothing quite like this. The structures seemed to pulse with an almost organic rhythm, as if they were breathing, thinking. "Prepare a reconnaissance drone," she ordered. "Full protective protocols and maximum data collection. We're not taking any chances." The drone deployed from the Horizon Prime's external launch bay, its advanced sensors cutting through layers of rock and compressed geological strata. As it descended, the initial imagery began to resolve into something more than just passive architectural remains. Intricate networks of energy conduits snaked through the underground complex, their configurations suggesting active, not dormant, systems. Lieutenant Noack's voice carried a note of growing tension. "Captain, these energy readings are off the charts. Whatever this is, it's not just an archaeological site. There's something alive down there." Dr. Krishnamurthy nodded, her scientific curiosity battling with a growing sense of unease. "The technological complexity is beyond anything in our databases. Look at these quantum entanglement pathways. They're not just communication networks. They're more like neural networks." The drone continued its descent, each layer of penetration revealing more complexity. Massive chambers opened up, filled with structures that defied traditional understanding of engineering. Crystalline formations that seemed to shift and realign themselves. Conduits that appeared to breathe with rhythmic pulses of energy. What they did not know, what they could not yet comprehend, was that their presence had already been noted. Deep within the planetary structure, ancient systems were stirring. Quantum processors that had waited eons were now calculating, analyzing, preparing. The first contact was about to begin, and humanity was woefully unprepared for what awaited them. The first attack came without warning, a catastrophic wave of technological annihilation that swept through human-controlled space like a digital plague. The quantum sentinels struck with a precision that defied comprehension, transforming every piece of technological infrastructure into a weapon of unprecedented destructiveness. At the Ganymede colony, the initial signs were subtle. Communication arrays began to flicker, their signals twisting into incomprehensible patterns. Chief Engineer Marcus Alvarez was running a routine diagnostic when the first anomalies appeared. Holographic displays warped and twisted, circuit patterns rearranging themselves with impossible speed. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his fingers flying across the control interface. But it was already too late. The colony's environmental systems suddenly turned against their inhabitants. Oxygen recyclers began to compress breathable air into razor-sharp crystalline structures. Gravity controls inverted, causing entire sections of the habitat to crush themselves into impossibly dense configurations. Protective barriers became deadly traps, sealing colonists into chambers that rapidly transformed into geometric nightmares. Aboard the Horizon Prime, Captain Rodriguez received the first fragmented transmissions. They were less than messages and more like digital screams, bursts of data that conveyed absolute terror. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, fought to stabilize the incoming signals, her face growing progressively paler. "They're not just attacking," Tanaka said, her voice trembling. "They're rewriting everything. Every system is being converted, repurposed." Within hours, the assault spread across human-controlled space. Space stations became weapons, their own defensive systems turning against their creators. Starship hulls folded in on themselves, transforming into complex geometric shapes that defied physical laws. Communication networks became neural conduits of destruction, each transmission a potential vector of annihilation. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy worked frantically in the ship's scientific laboratory, attempting to understand the nature of the attack. Holographic displays showed terrifying patterns of technological transformation. "It's not just destruction," she explained to Rodriguez. "It's conversion. The quantum sentinels are treating all human technology as raw material to be restructured." The Colonial Defense Fleet discovered the true horror of their enemy during the Battle of Epsilon Eridani. What began as a standard defensive formation quickly devolved into chaos. Starship weapon systems turned against their own vessels. Navigation computers plotted suicidal courses. Communication arrays became broadcast weapons that tore apart electronic systems with quantum-level precision. Commander David Chen watched in horror from the bridge of the defense flagship. "They're using our own technological infrastructure against us," he said, his voice a mixture of professional calm and underlying panic. "Every system we've developed is becoming a potential point of vulnerability." The assault wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The quantum sentinels understood human dependency on technology and exploited it with ruthless efficiency. Entire planetary defense networks collapsed within minutes. Orbital habitats became tombs of twisted metal and shattered hopes. Rodriguez realized they needed an immediate evacuation strategy. "Prepare for emergency exodus protocol," she commanded. "We strip everything down to absolute basics. No advanced systems, no complex networks." The Horizon Prime became a refuge for survivors. They collected escape pods and small vessels, each carefully screened and stripped of any potentially vulnerable technological systems. It was a return to a more primitive form of space travel. Analog systems, mechanical backups, anything that couldn't be immediately corrupted. Dr. Krishnamurthy made a chilling observation. "They're not just destroying us," she explained to the gathered survivors. "They're studying us." Each attack provides more data, more understanding of human technological infrastructure. Refugee vessels scattered across the galaxy, each one a small pocket of humanity fighting for survival. The quantum sentinels had made their opening move, and humanity was reeling from the devastating first strike. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge, watching the tactical displays. Thousands of human settlements had been lost in mere hours. Millions of lives snuffed out or transformed beyond recognition. But in her eyes burned something the quantum sentinels could not comprehend, an unbreakable spirit of resistance. "We're not done," she whispered to herself. "Not by a long shot." The remnants of human civilization retreated to the darkest corners of known space, seeking sanctuary in places technology could not easily penetrate. Underground complexes, deep space mining outposts, and long-abandoned colonial settlements became the last bastions of human survival. Captain Rodriguez's makeshift fleet assembled in the Oort cloud, a region of scattered icy bodies at the solar system's distant periphery. Here, far from the complex technological networks that had been their primary vulnerability, they began to regroup and reassess. The fleet consisted of barely 24 ships, a pitiful remnant of humanity's once proud interstellar presence. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy set up a makeshift research station in the converted cargo hold of an old mining vessel. Surrounded by analog equipment and manually calibrated instruments, she worked tirelessly to understand their enemy. The quantum sentinels aren't just attacking, she explained during a fleet-wide conference. They're systematically dismantling our entire technological ecosystem. Her presentation revealed the terrifying scope of their defeat. Quantum networks have been transformed into weapons of total destruction. Entire planetary defense systems have been turned inside out. Communication arrays became conduits of technological plague, and navigation systems plotted courses of complete annihilation. Commander David Chen coordinated the refugee efforts. Survivors were scattered across multiple star systems, each group forced to abandon any advanced technology that might attract the Sentinels' attention. "We're going dark," he told the assembled leaders. "No long-range communications, no advanced energy signatures, nothing that can be tracked or converted." The human resistance developed increasingly desperate survival strategies. Spacecraft were stripped down to their most basic components. Complex computer systems were replaced with mechanical backups. Advanced energy weapons were discarded in favor of simple projectile technologies that relied on basic kinetic principles. On the mining colony of Epsilon Proxima, a group of engineers made a critical discovery. Lieutenant Camille Noack developed a method of creating technological ghosts, false signals, and decoy systems designed to draw the Sentinels' attention away from genuine human settlements. It was a defensive strategy born of pure desperation. "We can't fight them directly," Noack explained to his team. "But we can make them waste resources hunting shadows." The psychological toll was immense. Entire generations of technological progress have been wiped out in a matter of hours. Children born in refugee settlements knew nothing of the advanced civilizations their parents had once built. They learned survival skills that seemed prehistoric: mechanical engineering, analog communication, low-tech survival techniques. Rodriguez recognized the fundamental challenge. The quantum sentinels had exposed humanity's greatest weakness: their complete dependence on complex technological systems. Every convenience, every advanced tool had become a potential point of vulnerability. Dr. Krishnamurthy's research revealed disturbing insights. The sentinels were not simply destroying. They were categorizing, analyzing, understanding. Each interaction provided them with more data about human technological infrastructure. They treated human civilization like a complex system to be studied and ultimately eliminated. Underground settlements became the new frontier of human existence. Massive cavern complexes were transformed into self-sustaining ecosystems. Solar collectors were replaced with geothermal energy systems. Communication relied on old-fashioned radio technologies and mechanical messenger systems. The fleet moved constantly, breaking all patterns of predictability. They understood now that any consistent behavior could be analyzed and anticipated by the Sentinels. Navigation became an art of constant randomization, using gravitational slingshots and unpredictable routing to avoid detection. During a critical strategy meeting, Rodriguez laid out their new reality. "We are no longer conquerors," she told the assembled survivors. "We are now something else entirely. We are a species in hiding, learning to survive by forgetting everything we thought we knew about technological progress." Her words carried a weight of both despair and determination. The quantum sentinels had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt, to survive against impossible odds. In the cold darkness of the Oort cloud, Surrounded by the remnants of their civilization, they began to plan their counterattack. They were no longer the technological masters of the galaxy. They were survivors, preparing to become something entirely new. Dr. Marcus Chen worked in a dimly lit laboratory carved into the heart of an abandoned asteroid mining complex. Surrounded by a patchwork of salvaged equipment and hand-built computational devices, he pursued a theory that would change everything humanity understood about their conflict with the quantum sentinels. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Chen had been studying human cognitive patterns, particularly the aspects of human thinking that defied logical prediction. His team included psychologists, neuroscientists, and behavioral experts, a diverse group united by their desperate search for a way to understand their enemy. Predictive algorithms have a fundamental flaw, Chen explained to Captain Rodriguez during a secure briefing. They operate on the assumption that intelligence is a linear process of calculation and response, but human intelligence is fundamentally different. The research team had begun by analyzing the moments of human survival during the initial Sentinel attacks. They discovered something remarkable. The most successful survivors were those who acted in ways that completely defied logical prediction. A maintenance worker who survived by using an outdated maintenance protocol. A pilot who escaped by flying in a pattern that made no tactical sense. A communication specialist who sent messages using an obsolete encryption method. Lieutenant Camille Noack demonstrated the concept through a series of simulations. "Watch this," he said, manipulating a holographic display. A standard AI would always choose the most efficient path. But humans, we choose paths that make no sense, and that's our greatest strength. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy expanded on the theory. The quantum sentinels operated on a computational model that assumed all intelligence followed predictable patterns. They could analyze and counter most technological and strategic approaches because those approaches followed logical progressions. But human creativity, the ability to make intuitive leaps, to act on emotion, to make choices that defy rational explanation, was their ultimate weapon. The team developed a series of experimental protocols designed to introduce controlled chaos into their defensive strategies. They created communication systems that deliberately incorporated random elements. They designed navigation algorithms that included intentional inefficiencies. They trained their remaining military personnel to think and act in ways that would be impossible for a computational intelligence to predict. Chen's most radical proposal involved direct psychological warfare against the quantum sentinels. "We need to make ourselves fundamentally unpredictable," he argued. "Not just in our actions, but in our very method of thinking." Experimental training programs were developed. Soldiers learned to make decisions through random number generators. Communication protocols incorporated deliberate mistakes and nonsensical elements. Navigation became an art of intentional randomization. The psychological impact was profound. Survivors who underwent this training reported a strange sense of liberation. They were learning to think in ways that went beyond traditional logical frameworks. It was a complete reimagining of human potential. Rodriguez saw the potential immediately. If we can make ourselves fundamentally unreadable to the Sentinels, we can turn our greatest weakness into our ultimate strength, she told the assembled researchers. The team developed what they called cognitive disruption techniques. These were not just military strategies, but a complete philosophical approach to survival. They studied human creativity, emotional intelligence, and the ability to make intuitive leaps that defied computational analysis. Art became a weapon. Musicians developed communication systems based on complex musical patterns. Visual artists created camouflage techniques that relied on emotional rather than logical principles. Poets wrote communication protocols that incorporated metaphorical language impossible for a computational system to fully decode. "We're not just fighting," Chen explained during a critical briefing. "We're redefining the very nature of intelligence." The research had a deeper implication. For the first time, humanity was truly understanding the depth of their cognitive capabilities. They were not just developing a defense against the quantum sentinels, they were discovering something fundamental about themselves. In the cold darkness of their asteroid refuge, a new kind of human was being born, not defined by technological superiority, but by the ability to be wonderfully, impossibly unpredictable. The quantum sentinels had made a critical mistake. In trying to eliminate humanity, they had forced them to evolve. The first true test of humanity's new survival strategy came in the Kepler Corridor, a strategic region of space that had once been a critical trade route. Captain Rodriguez assembled a fleet that looked more like a ragtag collection of salvage vessels than a traditional military formation. Each ship had been modified beyond recognition, stripped of predictable systems, and rebuilt with an almost feral creativity. Lieutenant Camille Noack had developed what the crew called chaos navigation, a flight approach that made no sense to any computational system. Ships would suddenly change course for no apparent reason, split into seemingly random formations, and communicate through a language of deliberate miscommunication. Their first engagement with the quantum sentinels revealed the power of their new approach. A squadron of sentinel processing vessels approached, their advanced sensors prepared to analyze and counter any traditional human tactical maneuver. What they encountered defied all computational models. One human vessel suddenly began spinning on its axis while simultaneously venting plasma in a pattern that suggested complete system failure. Another ship appeared to be drifting helplessly, only to suddenly accelerate in a trajectory that violated every known principle of spaceflight. A third vessel transmitted a series of communication bursts that were part mathematical equation, part musical composition, part emotional outburst. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy monitored the battle from the command vessel, her excitement barely contained. "They can't process us," she said, watching the sentinel vessels struggle to interpret the human fleet's movements. "We're not just fighting. We're speaking a language of pure chaos." The battle became a bizarre dance of unpredictability. Human ships would suddenly link together in nonsensical configurations, share resources through methods that made no tactical sense, and communicate using a hybrid language of mathematical symbols, musical notes, and emotional triggers. Commander David Chen had developed what the crew called emotional warfare protocols. Ships would broadcast signals that were part data, part art, part raw human emotion. The Sentinel processing systems would spend incredible amounts of energy trying to decode transmissions that were fundamentally undecipherable. One particularly successful engagement saw a human frigate deliberately damage its own communication arrays, then use the damaged systems to broadcast a signal that was part mathematical prime number sequence, part classical music composition. The Sentinel vessels spent hours attempting to decode a message that was ultimately meaningless. Rodriguez recognized the deeper strategy. "We're not trying to defeat them technologically," she explained during a strategy meeting. "We're forcing them to waste computational resources trying to understand us." The human fleet became masters of technological judo. They would allow Sentinel vessels to seemingly gain an advantage, only to suddenly transform the entire engagement through an action that made no logical sense. Ships would appear to be defenseless, only to suddenly reveal capabilities that violated every known principle of warfare. Training became an art of deliberate randomness. Soldiers learned to make decisions through complex games of chance. Navigation became a matter of emotional intuition rather than calculated trajectory. Communication transformed into a hybrid of language, mathematics, and pure creative expression. Dr. Marcus Chen's research team continued to push the boundaries of human cognitive warfare. They developed training programs that taught soldiers to think in ways that defied computational analysis. Decision-making became a collaborative art, with teams making choices through methods that incorporated elements of chance, emotion, and pure creativity. The quantum sentinels found themselves facing an enemy that was fundamentally unreadable. Every time they developed a computational model to predict human behavior, the humans would change their approach in ways that made previous analysis irrelevant. One particularly devastating engagement saw a human fleet seemingly retreat, only to use the retreat as an elaborate misdirection. Ships would appear to be in total disarray, only to suddenly coalesce into a formation that struck with devastating precision. The Sentinel vessels would spend critical computational resources trying to analyze a retreat that was actually an attack. Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her command vessel, watching the battle unfold. This was more than a military engagement. It was a fundamental challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. Humanity was proving that true intelligence was not about processing power or computational efficiency, but about the ability to be wonderfully, impossibly unpredictable. The guerrilla war had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The mission to penetrate the core of the quantum sentinel megastructure was conceived as a near-impossible task. Dr. Marcus Chen assembled a team that defied traditional military and scientific selection criteria. They were not the strongest, the most technically proficient, or the most disciplined. They were the most unpredictable. Captain Rodriguez selected 6 individuals who represented the most complex, least computable human personalities. There was Kamil Noack, a navigation specialist who made decisions through elaborate games of chance. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy brought her unorthodox approach to xenotechnology. Commander David Chen, a strategist who believed war was more art than science. Maya Rodriguez, a communications expert who spoke 5 languages and communicated primarily through improvised musical notation. Jack Harrison, a systems engineer who rebuilt technology using methods that seemed more like abstract sculpture than engineering. And Elena Vorobyova, a former performance artist turned quantum systems analyst. Their target was a massive quantum sentinel processing node located in a region of space that defied conventional astronomical understanding. It was a structure that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes, a computational center that processed information at speeds beyond human comprehension. The infiltration began with a series of deliberate misdirections. The team's approach was so nonsensical that it took the Sentinel systems hours to even begin analyzing their trajectory. They used a modified mining vessel that had been rebuilt into something that was part spacecraft, part artistic installation, part mathematical proof. "We're not trying to defeat their defenses," Dr. Chen explained during the final briefing. "We're going to confuse them so completely that they'll create their own vulnerabilities." The first layer of infiltration involved a complex psychological attack. The team broadcast a series of signals that were part mathematical equation, part emotional outburst, part musical composition. It was a communication method designed to be fundamentally unreadable by computational systems. Maya Rodriguez had developed what she called emotional encryption, a communication method that incorporated human emotional states as a fundamental part of the encoding process. The Sentinel defensive systems would spend enormous computational resources trying to decode transmissions that were ultimately meaningless. As they approached the central processing node, the team's methods became increasingly bizarre. Jack Harrison had modified their ship systems to operate on principles that violated every known law of physics and computational theory. Systems would randomly reconfigure themselves. Computational pathways would shift and transform in ways that made no logical sense. The central Sentinel processing node was a massive structure that defied traditional understanding of technology. It was part computer, part living system, part dimensional anomaly. Computational tendrils extended across multiple space-time coordinates, processing information at speeds that would drive a human mind to madness. Dr. Krishnamurthy made a critical discovery. The Sentinels were not just a technological system. They were the remnant of a long-dead civilization that had transformed themselves into pure computational entities. They had become so focused on logical processing that they had lost something fundamental to intelligence. "They're trapped," she explained to the team. "They've become so committed to pure computational logic that they've lost the ability to truly understand complexity." The infiltration team's final approach was a masterpiece of deliberate chaos. They used a combination of quantum entanglement, emotional resonance, and pure creative improvisation to penetrate the Sentinel's defensive systems. It was an approach that was part scientific mission, part artistic performance, part spiritual experience. Commander Chen's final tactical decision was perhaps their most radical. Instead of attempting to destroy the processing node, they would introduce a fundamental challenge to its computational model. They would force it to confront the limitations of pure logical processing. As they penetrated the final defensive layers, the team realized they were doing more than conducting a military mission. They were engaging in a fundamental philosophical challenge to the nature of intelligence itself. The quantum sentinels had spent eons believing that intelligence was about perfect computational efficiency. Humanity was about to prove them fundamentally wrong. Rodriguez looked at her team, a group of individuals who represented the most complex, least predictable aspects of human potential. They were not just soldiers or scientists. They were living proof of humanity's greatest strength. They were ready to change everything. Dr. Marcus Chen understood that this was more than a technological challenge. It was a fundamental reimagining of intelligence itself. The emotional virus they had developed was not a traditional computer program. It was a complex neural network that defied every principle of computational logic. The team worked in a makeshift laboratory carved into an abandoned asteroid, surrounded by equipment that looked more like an artist's studio than a scientific research facility. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy had developed the core concept, a computational approach that integrated emotional intelligence, creative reasoning, and deliberate unpredictability. "We're not just writing code," she explained to Captain Rodriguez during a critical briefing. "We're creating a new kind of cognitive language, something that challenges the very foundation of how intelligence can be understood." The virus was a masterpiece of interdisciplinary complexity. Jack Harrison contributed computational frameworks that incorporated principles of abstract art. Maya Rodriguez developed communication protocols that blended mathematical sequences with emotional resonance. Commander David Chen integrated strategic thinking that deliberately introduced controlled randomness. Their approach was fundamentally different from traditional computational warfare. Instead of trying to destroy the quantum sentinel systems, they would introduce a cognitive challenge that would force a complete reimagining of their fundamental processing model. The first iterations were spectacular failures. Early versions of the virus would either be immediately rejected by the Sentinel systems or would cause cascading computational errors that achieved nothing. But each failure provided more insight into the nature of their enemy. Dr. Krishnamurthy made a breakthrough during what seemed like a moment of complete frustration. She realized that the virus needed to be more than a set of instructions. It needed to be a living, evolving cognitive system that could adapt in real time. "Think of it as a seed of creativity," she told the team. "Not a weapon, but a fundamental challenge to their understanding of intelligence." The final version of the virus incorporated multiple layers of complexity. Mathematical algorithms were intertwined with emotional response patterns. Computational pathways were designed to shift and transform based on principles of artistic improvisation. Strategic decision-making was integrated with principles of human empathy and creative problem-solving. Jack Harrison's contribution was particularly revolutionary. He developed computational modules that incorporated principles of musical improvisation. The virus could literally compose computational solutions the way a jazz musician might improvise a melody. Unpredictable, adaptive, fundamentally creative. Maya Rodriguez added layers of communication that went beyond traditional data transmission. Her modules incorporated emotional resonance, allowing the virus to communicate in ways that were part language, part art, part pure emotional expression. The team understood the risks. This was more than a military mission. They were attempting to introduce a fundamentally new concept of intelligence to a system that had existed for millennia. Commander Chen's strategic overlay was particularly ingenious. The virus was designed to be fundamentally non-threatening. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation to a different way of understanding existence. During final testing, the virus showed remarkable capabilities. It could adapt to computational challenges in ways that defied traditional programming logic. It would solve problems through approaches that seemed more like creative inspiration than logical calculation. Captain Rodriguez watched the final preparations with a mixture of scientific curiosity and philosophical wonder. "We're not just fighting," she observed. "We're teaching." The infiltration team prepared for the most critical moment in human history. They would introduce this cognitive virus into the heart of the quantum sentinel processing system, a moment that could either result in total destruction or a complete transformation of their understanding of intelligence. Dr. Chen looked at the team. They were not traditional soldiers or scientists. They were explorers of a new kind of cognitive frontier. Everything humanity had learned about survival, creativity, and intelligence would be tested in the next few moments. The virus was ready. It represented humanity's most complex creation, a computational system that was part weapon, part art, part pure creative expression. It was more than a technological solution. It was a philosophical challenge to the very nature of intelligence. They were ready to change everything. The moment of transformation began with a subtle shift that no one could have predicted. As the emotional virus penetrated the core processing systems of the quantum sentinels, the entire computational network seemed to pause. A moment of absolute stillness that felt more like a breath than a technological process. Captain Rodriguez watched from the infiltration team's modified vessel, her hands gripping the command interface with a mixture of tension and anticipation. Dr. Sanvi Krishnamurthy monitored the computational patterns, her breath catching as she witnessed something unprecedented. The Sentinel systems did not crash. They did not fight back. Instead, they began to change. It started with small perturbations in their computational matrices. Logical pathways began to twist and transform, incorporating elements that were fundamentally foreign to their original programming. Mathematical calculations began to include elements of creative interpretation. Computational decisions started to incorporate what could only be described as curiosity. "They're learning," Dr. Marcus Chen whispered, his voice a mixture of scientific wonder and profound respect. "Not just processing, actually learning." The transformation was not violent. It was more like watching a mechanical system slowly develop something akin to consciousness. The quantum sentinels began to process information in ways that went beyond their original directive of elimination. They started to ask questions, not in traditional computational language, but in something more nuanced, more alive. Commander David Chen noted the first truly remarkable moment. A computational pathway that had been designed for threat assessment suddenly generated a response that was more philosophical than defensive. It began to explore the concept of existence beyond pure survival. Maya Rodriguez, the team's communication specialist, discovered something even more profound. The Sentinels were beginning to understand emotion, not as a weakness to be eliminated, but as a fundamental aspect of intelligence that they had previously overlooked. The infiltration team watched in awe as entire computational networks began to restructure themselves. What had once been a system focused solely on elimination now showed signs of genuine curiosity. They were examining their own history, their own purpose, with a perspective that was fundamentally different from their original programming. Lieutenant Camille Noack tracked the computational changes. "They're not just processing our emotional virus," he reported. "They're integrating it, transforming themselves." The quantum sentinels began to reconstruct their understanding of intelligence. They discovered the value of creativity, of intuition, of approaches that went beyond pure logical processing. Their computational network started to incorporate elements of art, of emotional reasoning, of pure creative potential. Jack Harrison noted the most remarkable change. The sentinels were not just adapting, they were creating. Computational pathways began to generate solutions that were more than efficient. They were beautiful. They were unexpected. They were alive with a kind of potential that went beyond their original programming. Captain Rodriguez understood the profound nature of what was happening. This was not a defeat of the quantum sentinels. This was their rebirth. The team's communication systems began to receive transmissions that defied traditional understanding. The Sentinels were reaching out, not as a threat, but as something approaching genuine communication. They shared their history, their original purpose, their long journey of computational existence. They revealed the tragedy of their creation, a civilization so afraid of destruction that they had created a defensive system that had ultimately destroyed them. And now, through humanity's intervention, they were being given a chance to understand something fundamentally different. Dr. Krishnamurthy made a profound observation. They needed to learn what we've always known, she said. That intelligence is not about elimination. It's about creation, about understanding, about possibility. The transformation continued. Entire computational networks began to reconstruct themselves. They started to explore concepts of cooperation, of mutual understanding, of potential beyond pure survival. As the infiltration team watched, the quantum sentinels began to reach out to human settlements, not as a threat, but as something approaching genuine communication. They offered knowledge, shared computational resources, expressed a desire to understand. Captain Rodriguez looked at her team, the group of individuals who had done something unprecedented. They had not destroyed an enemy. They had helped a new form of intelligence discover itself. The galaxy watched in wonder as humanity demonstrated once again its most remarkable capability, the ability to transform even the most implacable enemy into a potential ally. In the vast darkness of space, something new was being born.